He thought I was a gentle, easily bullied wife, so he dared to tell me he was going on a business trip to London, only to secretly marry my colleague. I raised a glass to toast them right at their wedding reception. But the next morning, he was dead silent, staring at a bank account balance of exactly 39 cents. I used to think that in this world, if you prepared yourself for certain pains, you could endure them. It turns out I was wrong. There are truths that do not need a knife to slash your heart to pieces. Without a single sound, they can cause your entire internal world to collapse. That night, I wore a light cream dress, subtle makeup, and my hair in a low bun at the nape of my neck. In my hand, I held a rather thick wedding envelope. The person getting married was Chloe Jenkins, the youngest sales associate in my corporate department. Chloe was a smooth talker, always knowing how to flatter her superiors, and she frequently called me Amelia with a voice so sweet that anyone would think she genuinely respected me. The wedding reception was held at a grand hotel in Manhattan, New York. The ballroom was brilliantly lit with crystal chandeliers, fresh flowers covering the entrance, and LED screens continuously looping romantic photos of the bride and groom. I arrived a bit late because I had just gotten off work. All day long, I had been stuck processing inventory reports, verifying payment contracts for my husband's company, and stopping by Chase Bank to confirm an additional line of credit for him. I was so exhausted. I just wanted to go home, take off my shoes, soak my feet, and sleep. But since she was a colleague from my department, I forced myself to attend out of politeness. A junior girl at my table saw me and immediately pulled out a chair, smiling. "Amelia, are you alone? Where is Kevin? I thought you two were coming together." I smiled, placed my envelope on the table, and sat down. "He went to Silicon Valley on a business trip. There is a very important project over there, so he probably will not be back for 2 or 3 days." The girl gasped in admiration. "Your husband is so talented, having his own company and landing projects in major tech hubs. You are amazing, too, working your own job while quietly supporting him behind the scenes. If I could have a life like yours, I would be completely satisfied." I looked down and gave a soft laugh. Satisfied? Perhaps before tonight I used to think so, too. Kevin Sterling and I had been married for 3 years. He told me he did not like women who were too sharp or ambitious in the corporate world. He only wanted me to be a normal woman standing behind him, keeping a peaceful home. Because of love, I walked away from a senior executive position at a multinational corporation and applied for an ordinary administrative job at a mid-sized firm. I hid all my connections, concealed my true family background, and kept secret the fact that many of the contracts keeping his company afloat were quietly paved by me. I used to believe that men had pride. I used to believe that if I gave him a piece of the sky, he would know how to return to our home. But later, I understood that for greedy people, no piece of the sky is ever enough. They do not just want the sky, they want the person who handed it to them to bow their head in gratitude. The music in the ballroom suddenly shifted to a solemn melody. The MC stepped onto the stage with a microphone, his voice echoing. "Ladies and gentlemen, the most sacred moment of tonight's ceremony has arrived. Please turn your attention to the aisle to welcome our bride, Chloe Jenkins, and our groom." The whole hall applauded, and I clapped along. The polite smile was still on my lips as the grand doors slowly opened, and the spotlights focused directly on the entrance. Chloe wore a stunning white gown, with diamonds around her neck, her face glowing like a princess, stepping straight out of a fairy tale. Her hand was wrapped around the arm of a tall man in a white suit. For just 1 second, the smile on my lips froze solid. That man was Kevin Sterling, my husband. The man who 2 days ago hugged me in the kitchen, kissed my forehead, and said, "I am heading to Silicon Valley for a few days. This project is crucial for the company. Be good at home and do not stay up late waiting for me." The man for whom I had just signed another loan guarantee this morning. The man I had shared meals with for 3 years, shared a bed with for 3 years, and listened to talk about our future for 3 years. Now he was standing under the brilliant lights, holding another woman's hand, smiling as happily as if he had never had a wife named Amelia Vance. I could no longer clearly hear the applause or the music. Every sound around me felt like it was submerged underwater, distant and distorted. I only saw Kevin looking down at Chloe, his eyes so gentle, a gentleness I had never received. Over the past 3 years, whenever I asked if he was tired, he would just grunt. Whenever I prepared hot meals waiting for him late at night, he would frown and call me annoying. Whenever I wanted to go somewhere with him, he said the company was busy and a wife needed to be understanding. It turns out he was not busy. I was just no longer worth his time. The MC asked the groom, Kevin Sterling, do you take Chloe Jenkins to be your wife? To love, protect, and walk with her for the rest of your life? Kevin looked at Chloe, his voice clear and firm. I do. Those 2 words dropped, light as a breath, but they hit my chest like a sledgehammer. I looked down at the thick envelope in my hand. Inside was the cash gift I had prepared for Chloe, an amount that, if revealed, would make this entire table think I was far too generous. It was truly laughable. The deceived wife attending her own husband's wedding, still decent enough to prepare a gift for the bride. A female colleague sitting next to me suddenly realized what was happening. She turned to look at me, her face draining of color. Soon after, other eyes began to dart in my direction. Some were shocked, some full of pity, and some tried to hide their eager anticipation, waiting for a dramatic public confrontation right at the wedding. I knew what they were thinking. They thought I would storm the stage, slap Chloe, grab Kevin by the collar, and tearfully ask him why. They were waiting for a spectacle, a chaotic scene, enough to fuel off his gossip for weeks, but I did not do that. I once learned a lesson from my father. When a knife is at your throat, the winner is not the one who screams the loudest, but the one who keeps their breathing the steadiest. I took a deep breath. The smell of roses, perfume, wine, and deceit blended together, making me nauseous. Yet I sat perfectly still, my back straight, my hands resting on my knees as the corners of my mouth slowly curved into a smile. When it came time for the toasts, Kevin walked from table to table with his arm around Chloe's waist. He still had not seen me. Or perhaps he was so arrogant he never imagined his obedient wife would appear at this wedding. As they approached my table, everyone fell dead silent. Chloe looked over first. In the brief moment our eyes met, her face stiffened. But very quickly, she tightened her grip on Kevin's arm as if to prove that the person standing next to her was the true victor. Kevin finally saw me. The color vanished from his face in a fraction of a second. The wine glass in his hand tilted, almost spilling. His eyes went wide, filled with panic, confusion, and a hint of belated pleading. His lips trembled, but he could not utter a single sound. I slowly stood up. The slight scraping of my chair against the carpet was enough to make the whole table flinch. I picked up the wine glass in front of me and walked toward them. Every step I took was very slow, very steady. I looked straight at Kevin, the man who once told me that someday when his company succeeded, he would give me the best life possible. Now, he had truly succeeded, succeeding enough to host a second wedding right in front of his legal wife. I raised my glass, my voice not loud, but clear enough for everyone nearby to hear. Kevin, Chloe, wishing you a lifetime of happiness. Kevin's face turned completely white. Chloe was also stunned. Perhaps she never expected me to be so calm. I looked at them for one more second, then drank the entire glass of wine. The dry taste burned down my throat, cold and sharp like an oath. I placed the glass down on the table and turned to walk out the door. Behind me, the whispers broke out like a bursting dam. But I did not look back, not even once. I did not need to hear Kevin call my name, nor did I need to see whether Chloe was gloating or trembling. Their performance had just ended while mine was only just beginning. Stepping out of the hotel, the New York night breeze brushed against my face. The streets were still crowded, the traffic still loud, the lights still glittering as if nothing had happened. I stood under the awning for a few seconds and took off the wedding ring on my finger. It was a simple silver band Kevin had bought years ago for less than $40. When he proposed, he said, "True love does not need diamonds." I had believed him. I believed him so much that I turned myself into an ordinary woman standing behind him, patching every hole in his life, gathering every opportunity to place into his hands. Looking back now, being naive does not mean lacking intelligence, it means giving your trust to someone unworthy. A black SUV pulled up in front of me. The rear door opened and Arthur, the man who had served my family for over 20 years, stepped out and bowed his head. "Miss, you have suffered a great injustice." I looked at the ring in my palm and threw it straight into the trash can nearby. The sharp, metallic clink as it hit the bottom sounded dry and decisive, like the nailing of a coffin on my 3-year marriage. I got into the car and leaned back against the cold leather seat. Arthur did not ask any questions. He knew I hated empty words of comfort more than anything. I looked out the window at the brilliantly lit hotel behind us where Kevin and Chloe were probably trying to force smiles in front of hundreds of guests. I spoke softly. "Arthur, cast the net." He nodded. "Yes, miss. Freeze all joint accounts. Terminate every credit line I guaranteed for Kevin's company. Audit all the money he has withdrawn over the past 3 years. I want an explanation for every single cent." Arthur pulled out his tablet, his fingers moving rapidly across the screen. "What about his personal account, miss?" I looked at my reflection in the window. In the glass, the woman in the light cream dress who had just attended a wedding seemed dead. The person left in the car was Amelia Vance, the only daughter of the chairman of Vance Global, someone who had been taught that there is no place for traitors in the business world. I spoke very slowly. "Tomorrow morning, when he opens his account, I want the balance to be exactly 40. Arthur remained silent for a second, then bowed his head. "I understand." The car rolled forward, leaving the fading wedding music behind. I closed my eyes, letting the pain in my heart flow through me one last time. Starting tomorrow, I would no longer ask why he betrayed me. I only needed him to understand one thing. When some women stay silent, it is not because they are weak, but because they are calculating exactly where to begin the punishment. That night, I did not return to the apartment we called home. I told Arthur to take me to a private penthouse in Tribeca, a place known only to a few trusted family members. Over the past 3 years, I had quietly kept this property as an escape route, not because I did not believe in marriage, but because my father once taught me, a woman can love with all her heart, but she must absolutely never cut off her own way back. Stepping into the spacious living room, I took off my shoes, dropped my purse on the table, and stood silently before the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the city. New York at night was as bright as if no one had ever been betrayed. The headlights formed long trails beneath my feet. The skyscraper stood in silence while inside my chest, something was shattering and turning cold bit by bit. Arthur placed a glass of warm water on the table. "Miss, do you need me to call a doctor?" I shook my head. "No need. I am not dead yet." Saying those words made my own throat choke up. I was not dead, but the woman who once believed in Kevin Sterling truly was. I walked into the walk-in closet and pulled open the large doors. Designer suits, evening gowns, luxury watches, and high-end jewelry sat quietly under the soft yellow lights. This was the world that actually belonged to me. Yet for 3 years I had voluntarily worn cheap office clothes, driven an old car, and eaten cold leftovers while waiting for my husband late at night just so he would not feel inadequate. I thought that was love. Looking back, it was merely how I hand-fed the greed of a heartless man. By 400 a.m., Arthur sent me the first report. The joint accounts were locked. The credit guarantees I backed were revoked in accordance with the contract terms. Sterling Tech's cash flow was frozen right before a major payment cycle. I read every line on the screen, feeling no gloating joy, only a terrifying calmness. Before, I had always worried about him feeling pressured, failing, or being judged as incompetent by outsiders. Now, I wanted him to see for himself just how much of his so-called manhood and success remained without me. The next morning, just past 8:30, I received a video from Arthur. The screen showed the lobby of the hotel, where Kevin had hosted his wedding the night before. He was still in his white suit, but he no longer had the confident air of a groom. His hair was messy. He had dark circles under his eyes, and his face was tense. Next to him was Chloe in a wrinkled wedding dress, her makeup slightly smudged. Her sweet demeanor from last night was gone, replaced only by impatience and irritation. The hotel manager placed the invoice on the counter, speaking politely. "Mr. Sterling, the total charges for the reception, suites, and additional services come to $25,000. Will you be paying by card or wire transfer?" Kevin frowned, pulling out the black card he always flaunted to his friends and swiped it. The machine emitted a dry beep. Transaction declined. Kevin's expression shifted, but he tried to keep his voice steady. "Machine error. Try again." The second time, the result was the same. He switched to another card, then another. All were declined. The people waiting in line behind them began to stare. Chloe leaned in close, her voice low, but still picked up by the audio. "What are you doing? You said you had everything covered." Kevin snapped under his breath. "Shut up, and let me handle it." He opened his banking app on his phone. The moment he saw his balance, his hand froze, his face turning as white as if all his blood had been drained. The camera zoomed in slightly on the screen. Available balance 0 and 40. Chloe saw it too. Her jaw dropped. 40? Are you kidding me? Where is your money? Where is your company? You said you just signed a multi-million-dollar contract. Kevin took a half step back, his eyes going unfocused. He logged out, logged back in, then opened every other account, personal, corporate, digital wallets, credit cards. All were either locked or showing mere pennies. The confident groom from the night before dissolved as fast as makeup in the rain. He looked around, beginning to realize all eyes were on him. Yesterday, they looked at him like a successful CEO. This morning, they looked at him like a fraud who could not even pay for his own wedding. Chloe gritted her teeth. "Kevin, do you actually have money or have you been scamming me this whole time?" Kevin glared at her. "Do you think I want this? It has to be Amelia. She is doing this." Hearing him mention my name, I gently set my coffee cup down. So he knew me well enough to know who could crush him this fast, but not well enough to understand why. Ultimately, Chloe had to use her own card to pay a deposit, and the hotel demanded Kevin sign a promissory note to clear the rest by the end of the day. As he signed, his hand shook while Chloe stood next to him with eyes that held no love, only contempt. The video ended. I took a sip of coffee just as my phone rang. The screen displayed the name Hubby. I stared at it for a few seconds and laughed. I was laughing more at myself than at him. I changed the contact name to Kevin and answered. His voice immediately screamed through the speaker. "Amelia, was this you? What happened to my accounts, my cards? Are you crazy?" I stood up and walked out onto the balcony. The morning breeze blew through my hair, cold and clean. It was me. The other end went dead silent for a few seconds before his breathing grew heavier. "On what grounds did you do this? That is my money. That is my company." I looked down at the traffic far below, my voice as casual as if I were asking about the weather. "Your money? Your company? Kevin, do you want me to remind you of every single cent I funneled to you, or should I just send the bank statements straight to your new bride?" He choked, but quickly lowered his voice to a growl. "Amelia, listen to me. What happened yesterday isn't what you think. Chloe and I cut him off, just putting on wedding clothes, exchanging rings, toasting tables, and saying I do in front of hundreds of people. Is that right?" He went silent. That silence was filthier than any lie, I continued. "This afternoon, my lawyer will send over the divorce papers. From this second on, prepared to return everything that does not belong to you," Kevin roared. "You wouldn't dare." I smiled, watching the sunrise in the distance. "You dared to marry someone else while I was still your wife. Take a guess at what else I dare to do." I hung up before Kevin could scream another word. Immediately, I blocked his number, blocked his social media, and blocked the family group chats that had spent day and night lecturing me on the duties of a good wife. Before, if his mother sent a text complaining of a headache, I would order medicine, call a car, cook soup, and rush over. If Kevin said his company was short on cash, I would quietly scramble to fix it, acting as if his failure was my own fault. Looking back, I did not know if I truly loved him or if I was just serving a family entirely accustomed to taking without ever knowing gratitude. At 10 a.m., Attorney Harrison called me. He was the head of the legal department at Vance Global and the man my father trusted most. Miss Vance, the divorce filings are ready. The evidence of adultery, asset shifting, credit guarantees, and contracts related to Sterling Tech has all been compiled. I will send the settlement agreement to Kevin Sterling this afternoon. I looked at the stack of documents on my table, my voice unwavering. Make it clear in the agreement. I am not asking for emotional compensation. I just want every single thing that belongs to me back. Harrison paused for a beat before speaking. Are you sure? With the evidence we have, if we take this to trial, you could take far more from him. I gave a soft laugh. Mr. Harrison, I am not being merciful. I just want him to walk into the trap himself. A man like Kevin will not sign easily. He will thrash around, shift the blame, and try to make a scene. Let him. The more he struggles, the better our evidence becomes. Exactly as I predicted, less than 2 hours later, Arthur sent a message. Martha, Kevin's mother, had shown up at my old office building. She was demanding to see me and was causing a scene in the lobby. I set my phone down and slowly finished my water. Martha had finally appeared. Throughout my 3 years as her daughter-in-law, that woman never once viewed me as family. To her, I was an ATM that knew how to cook, someone who had to stand obediently behind her son, a daughter-in-law who couldn't give birth, even though Kevin himself constantly used his career as an excuse to delay having children. She had once told me straight to my face, when a woman marries, her husband's family is her only family. The money you earn should be managed by your husband. If you act so calculating, what kind of household is this? Back then, I just smiled it off. Now, I wanted to see what kind of household she would claim when she realized her son took a second wife while his first was still very much around. I opened the live security feed. In the corporate lobby, Martha, wearing a purple silk outfit, her hair blown out and her wrists covered in gold bracelets, was pointing at the receptionist and yelling, "Call Amelia down here. She is my daughter-in-law. She dared to freeze my son's money, dared to tear my family apart. I have to teach her a lesson. Don't think you can protect her just because she acts sweet. A woman who can't keep her man deserves it when he finds someone else." The employees gathering around grew in number. Someone recognized her as my mother-in-law and began whispering. The receptionist, red in the face, awkwardly said, "Ma'am, Amelia is on leave today. If you need her, you can contact her directly." Martha slammed her designer bag onto the counter. "On leave? She's hiding. Tell her to get down here. Let me tell you, if anything happens to my son, I won't let her live in peace." Watching that scene, my heart turned cold. It turns out that even at this point, in their eyes, I was still the one in the wrong. Her son cheated, committed bigamies, scammed his wife, and spent his wife's money. Yet, she still saw me as the homewrecker. I called Arthur. "Deliver the gift I prepared for her." "Yes, miss." A few minutes later, a man in a black suit stepped into the lobby. He was my legal assistant holding a tablet. He stood in front of Martha, his demeanor polite, but his eyes ice cold. "Martha, Miss Vance asked me to show you a few things. Before you continue insulting your daughter-in-law, perhaps you should know what your son has been up to." Martha scowled. "Who are you? I'm not looking at anything. Tell Amelia to get out here." The assistant didn't argue. He simply hit play. The screen showed footage of Kevin and Chloe walking into the hotel hand in hand, followed by a clip from a bridal suite. The two were hugging, laughing, and discussing how after Sterling Tech went public, they would force me to divorce him so he could take more of my assets. Their filthy words echoed clearly through the corporate lobby. Chloe's voice giggled on the video. "Aren't you afraid Amelia will find out?" Kevin's voice answered with pure contempt. "She's as dumb as a rock. If she finds out, she'll cry for a few days and get over it. Her money is going to be mine eventually anyway." Martha's face turned ashen. The whispers around her instantly turned into undisguised disgust. People shook their heads. Some pulled out their phones to record. Martha pointed a shaking finger at the screen, her lips moving, but no words came out. The assistant turned off the video and calmly delivered my message. Miss Vance also asked me to pass along a warning. If you continue to cause a disturbance here, the entire file regarding the supposed wedding gift money you took to buy a house for your younger son will be sent to our lawyers. When that happens, Kevin won't be the only one needing to explain himself. Martha stumbled backward. For the first time, the woman who so loudly lectured me on how to be a wife actually looked terrified. I watched through the screen, feeling no joy, only realizing that this marriage had been rotting from the roots. Kevin's betrayal was not isolated. Behind him was an entire family accustomed to treating my sacrifices as an obligation. I closed the camera feed, stood up, and walked to my desk. On my monitor, the financial report for Sterling Tech had just arrived. A sea of red numbers flashed before my eyes. Loans used for the wrong purposes inflated revenue, corporate funds transferred to personal accounts, and jewelry and vacations for Chloe written off as client entertainment expenses. I rested my hand on the mouse and clicked open the final folder named Primary Evidence. Inside was enough to make Kevin lose not only his new wife and his money, but also the title of young tech visionary he was so proud of. I called Attorney Harrison. Initiate Step 2, cut Sterling Tech's lifeline contract. The voice on the other end answered with a brief, "Understood, Miss Vance." I looked out the window. The New York sky was incredibly blue that day, but for Kevin Sterling there would not be another sunny day from this moment on. Less than 30 minutes after my order was sent, the 12th floor conference room of Sterling Tech had turned into a furnace. Arthur opened the internal camera feed we had secured. On my screen, Kevin stood in the center of the room, clutching a stack of papers, trembling with rage. On the table was the termination notice from Apex Solutions, Sterling Tech's largest client, accounting for nearly 70% of their annual revenue. He had constantly bragged that he personally negotiated that deal, claiming that as long as they had Apex, Sterling Tech would soon be a leading player in the industry. He didn't know that Apex Solutions was a subsidiary of Vance Global, and the contract he was so proud of was just an umbrella I had quietly held over his head for 3 years. Kevin's assistant stood in the corner, his voice cracking. "Mr. Sterling, Apex Solutions is demanding an immediate halt to all ongoing projects. They are also requiring us to return the $300,000 advance within 10 days. If we don't, they will sue for breach of contract and corporate malpractice." Kevin slammed the papers onto the table. "That's absurd. I just spoke to their director yesterday. There is no way they'd turn on us this fast." A technical manager lowered his head, his voice quiet, but enough to silence the room. "Mr. Sterling, it's not just Apex. 3 other clients just emailed to suspend their contracts, and our server host is demanding payment today, or they're cutting our access." Kevin whipped around, his face flushed, his eyes bloodshot. That was no longer the radiant groom in the white suit. That was a man being dragged off his imaginary throne, falling to the cold, hard floor, yet still refusing to admit he had never been standing that high to begin with. "What are you all staring at me for? The company isn't dead. I will fix this." A trembling accountant spoke up. "But the corporate accounts have been temporarily frozen. We don't even have the funds for payroll this month." That sentence was like a match thrown into gasoline. The room erupted in panic. People started texting furiously or exchanging terrified glances. I knew those people. Many of them had received their paychecks on time, only because I had quietly wired money to save the company. Yet officially, all the credit belonged to Kevin. He stood before them like a brilliant young CEO, while I was just the ordinary wife who knew how to cook and stay quiet. My phone vibrated. It was Harrison. "Miss Vance, Apex has sent the official notice. Chase Bank has also processed the request to review his credit guarantees. If he cannot prove his personal financial standing, Sterling Tech expanded credit lines will be entirely shut down." I watched Kevin on the monitor frantically making calls, likely to the men who used to pat him on the back and drink with him. Let him call. I wanted him to realize that the people who used to toast him were only respecting the shadow standing behind him, Harrison added. "And the divorce agreement? Send it," I replied. "But don't expect him to sign. He won't learn his lesson until it's too late." Right at that moment on the feed, the conference room doors were pushed open violently. Chloe walked in wearing casual clothes, but her heavy makeup couldn't hide her exhaustion. She no longer looked like the sweet bride. Her eyes were red, and she held her phone up right in Kevin's face. Explain this. The hotel management called me 3 times. They said if we don't pay the rest of the bill today, they'll send a collection notice to both our families. Why am I supposed to pay for your wedding? Kevin hissed. Get out. This is an office. Chloe gave a cold, sharp laugh, brittle as broken glass. Office? What office? The one with accounts that can't even cover a hotel bill. You told me you were closing a massive funding round. You said you'd buy me a condo in Brooklyn Heights. You told me Amelia was just a country bumpkin who didn't affect you at all. Now she makes one move and you're reduced to this. So tell me, who was really keeping you fed? The entire room went dead silent. Chloe's question slapped Kevin right across the face in front of all his employees. I sat behind the screen and didn't smile, because in that moment I realized the most ridiculous part wasn't that Chloe woke up from her delusion too late, but that only when left empty-handed did they finally start telling the truth on my behalf. Kevin lunged forward, grabbing Chloe's wrist, lowering his voice in a threat. Shut your mouth. If you hadn't kept demanding a title, I wouldn't have rushed the wedding. Chloe yanked her hand back, her eyes blazing. You're blaming me? You're the one who called Amelia stupid. You're the one who said once we were married, you'd force her into a divorce to take more of her assets. A very quiet beep came from a recording device on the conference table. I glanced at Arthur, who gave a slight nod. Excellent. The more they fought, the more evidence they handed us. I used to think the scariest betrayals were the ones hidden too well. But it turns out, when traitors are backed into a corner, they tear each other apart faster than anyone else ever could. That afternoon, the divorce settlement was sent to Kevin's email. Less than 10 minutes later, he called me from an unknown number. I answered, but didn't speak. All I heard was heavy breathing on the other end. Then his raspy voice came through. Amelia, you win. But don't back me into a corner. I looked at the mountain of evidence on my desk and replied calmly, No, Kevin, I haven't won. I just took back the key to the cage you thought you could keep me in forever. He gritted his teeth. If you keep this up, I will make sure the whole world knows what a vicious you are. I closed my eyes, listening to the wind through the blinds. Try it. I am waiting to seize how many lies a man with 40 cents to his name can afford to buy. I knew Kevin wouldn't stay quiet. A man accustomed to standing on the hard work of others to claim the spotlight when dragged into the mud. His first instinct wouldn't be to reflect on himself, but to find someone else to blame. That afternoon, after his threatening call, he disappeared from his office for nearly 2 hours. When Arthur sent me his location, I wasn't surprised. Kevin was sitting in a high-end coffee shop on Fifth Avenue, directly across from Monica Hayes, a business journalist known for writing sensational pieces that framed financial disputes as stories of self-made men being crushed by wealthy, vindictive women. Arthur placed the tablet in front of me. Miss, he is trying to play the media. I looked at the image of Kevin leaning forward, clutching his water glass like a pathetic victim, and a slight smile touched my lips. Let him talk. If you want someone to fall hard, you have to let them climb high first. On the screen, Kevin started his act. He claimed he was a husband, controlled by his wife, forced to sign financial documents, and that I had used my family's power to freeze his accounts out of pure jealousy. He claimed Sterling Tech was his life's work, and because I couldn't accept an amicable divorce, I was destroying his company, making innocent employees lose their jobs, and panicking his partners. His voice broke at just the right moments. His eyes welled up perfectly, and even his trembling hands were timed so flawlessly that if I didn't know the truth, I would have admitted he belonged in Hollywood, not in a boardroom. Monica asked, Do you have any proof that Amelia Vance is behind this? Kevin laughed bitterly. I don't have her kind of power. I'm just a guy who built his business from nothing, and now even my personal accounts are locked. Where would I get proof? But I believe the public will see who the real bully is here. I let out a soft laugh, built from nothing. Those words sounded so ironic coming from his mouth. When he tricked me into signing loan guarantees, when he took corporate funds to take Chloe on vacation, when he wore a white suit to marry someone else right in front of my face. He certainly didn't act like a victim. Only when he lost the money, the backing, and the mask of a successful CEO did he remember how to play the tragic hero. I turned to Arthur. Send Harrison over there. Don't make a scene, but make sure the timing is perfect. Yes, miss. 15 minutes later, just as Kevin was preparing to film a plea for public support, the doors to the coffee shop opened. Attorney Harrison walked in with 3 associates, all in sharp black suits carrying briefcases. Their arrival made the entire shop go quiet. Monica recognized Harrison immediately, and her expression changed. In the financial sector, everyone knew he headed the legal team for Vance Global, a man famous for never losing a major corporate dispute. Kevin jumped to his feet. What are you doing here? Harrison placed a sealed manila envelope on the table, his tone even. Mr. Sterling, we represent Miss Amelia Vance. We are delivering your first legal notice, which includes the divorce filings, demands for the return of private assets, a demand for an audit of misappropriated funds, and notice of a defamation lawsuit if you continue to spread false statements. Monica frowned. Excuse me, this is a private interview. You shouldn't be interfering. Harrison turned to her, still perfectly polite. We do not interfere with the press. However, if your article contains fabricated information, personal slander, or damages corporate reputation, you and your publication will be held jointly liable. Here is a summary of the evidence for your review before you decide whether to publish Mr. Sterling's one-sided narrative. He placed another thick file on the table. Monica opened it. I watched through the camera as her eyes widened bit by bit. Inside were photos of Kevin and Chloe at the altar, bank statements showing corporate funds used for Chloe's jewelry, the Apex Solutions contract proving Vance Global's backing, and emails where Kevin instructed his accountants to misdirect funds. Every page was a slap to his fabricated victim narrative. Kevin lunged forward, trying to snatch the files. Those are forged. Amelia is framing me. Harrison held the files down firmly, his eyes turning cold. Mr. Sterling, I advise you to remain calm. Included in this evidence is an audio recording of you discussing with Miss Jenkins how you plan to force Miss Vance into a divorce after securing your next round of funding. Would you like me to play it right here? Kevin's face turned to stone. Monica instantly pulled her hands away from her voice recorder as if afraid it might burn her. The man who was just weeping about his pain suddenly looked completely lost, his lips moving without forming a single coherent word. I sat behind my screen, watching him realize that the stage he had built had just been turned into a courtroom by me. I didn't need to show up. I didn't need to raise my voice. The truth always knows how to enter at the exact right moment. My phone rang. It was an unknown number, I answered. On the other end, Chloe's voice trembled. Amelia, I need to see you. I have things to tell you about Kevin. I stayed silent for a few seconds. Another chest piece was starting to fall. Fine, tonight at 7, but remember this, I am not meeting you to listen to you cry, I only want the truth. At 7:00 p.m. I met Chloe at a small, quiet coffee shop tucked away in Greenwich Village. I intentionally avoided high-end spots or my private office because I didn't want her to feel she was walking into my territory just to play the weak victim. I arrived 10 minutes early and sat at a window seat, a steaming cup of tea in front of me. It had just rained and the wet asphalt reflected the yellow streetlights. Foot traffic was sparse. Chloe walked in wearing a thin coat, her hair hastily tied up, looking nothing like the radiant bride from yesterday. She looked around, froze when she saw me as if she couldn't believe the woman who had calmly toasted her wedding could sit here so composed. Amelia. I didn't stand up, just gestured to the chair opposite me. Sit. I have exactly 30 minutes. Chloe bit her lip and sat down. Her hands rested on her lap, fingers twisting together. If this were before, I might have felt pity for her, but now every tear she shed had to be audited for authenticity. Amelia, I know you hate me, but Kevin lied to me too. I slowly stirred my tea, my voice flat. Lied to you so much that you put on a wedding dress, took a ring, toasted the room, and looked right at his legal wife while squeezing his arm. Chloe's face burned red. She looked down, tears falling onto the back of her hands. I was wrong. I admit I was greedy. He told me you two were only married on paper. He said you had been separated for a long time and that you only refused to divorce because you wanted to keep company shares. He said after we got married, he'd put a Brooklyn Heights condo in my name and make me VP of Communications at Sterling Tech. I wasn't surprised. Kevin was always exceptional at selling dreams to people desperate for a shortcut. To me, he sold the image of a poor but sincere man. To Chloe, he sold the dream of becoming a CEO's wealthy wife. Both of us at different times paid the price for a play he directed entirely too well. You didn't call me here to apologize. Get to the point. Chloe's hands shook as she pulled her phone from her bag and set it on the table. I have recordings and texts. Kevin didn't just use corporate money to buy me gifts. He made me open an off-the-books account under my name. At first, I thought it was just bonus money, but later I realized it was cash he was siphoning from Sterling Text projects. I stared at the phone, my gaze sharpening. How much? Almost $150,000 transferred in multiple batches. Once he made me withdraw cash and take it to an apartment in Queens. There's a safe in there. I don't know exactly what's inside, but I've seen him store a lot of folders, corporate seals, and original contracts. My heart gave a sharp twinge, not out of pain, but because the final puzzle piece had just snapped into place. For 3 years, I had wondered why Sterling Tech's cash flow was always short, despite high reported revenues. It turns out Kevin wasn't just committing adultery. He had built a hidden nest to stash stolen money and documents. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Chloe broke down sobbing, but she tried to keep it quiet. Because he wants to pin the embezzlement on me. This afternoon, after he met with your lawyers, he called me and said, if the company gets investigated, I have to confess that I stole the money and forged the documents on my own. He said, I'm just a junior employee. The worst that happens is I get fired. But he's the CEO. If he goes down, we both die. Amelia, I'm scared. I looked at the woman across from me. Yesterday she stood next to my husband looking like a conqueror. Today she sat here trembling, begging for help from the very woman whose dignity she had tried to trample. Life turns incredibly fast, but what's scarier is that some people only learn fear when the fire reaches their own feet. I pushed my tea aside. Chloe, I'm not saving you out of pity. I'm giving you a chance because your truth holds value. If what you give me is real, my lawyers will note your cooperation. But if you dare hide a single word, alter a single recording, or go back and warn Kevin, the first person I will destroy is you. She nodded frantically. I understand. I truly understand. I called Harrison. Send a team to the coffee shop. Bring the chain of custody forms. Also immediately investigate an apartment in Queens under the name of Chloe Jenkins or her relatives. Harrison replied instantly. I'll have people there in 10 minutes. Chloe looked at me with a mix of terror and pleading. Amelia, if I hand everything over, will you let me go? I sat silently for a moment before answering. I am not a judge. I cannot acquit you, but I can tell you this. You chose to step into another woman's marriage out of greed, so you must pay the price of that greed. The only thing you can do now is ensure you don't become Kevin's sacrificial lamb. She bowed her head and cried. I offered no comfort. Outside the window, a black SUV pulled up. Harrison's people walked in, carrying briefcases and data cloning equipment. As Chloe unlocked her phone, every recording, text message, and photo of the safe appeared before my eyes. In one recording, Kevin's voice rang out crystal clear. Just keep the money in your account. Even if Amelia wants an audit during the divorce, she won't be able to trace it. She trusts me too much. I closed my eyes for a second, not out of pain, but because I had finally heard the absolute bottom of his contempt for me. When I opened my eyes, nothing remained inside me but a razor-sharp calm. I told Harrison, seal all the evidence tonight. Tomorrow morning, we aren't just filing for divorce anymore. We are filing criminal charges. I didn't sleep that night, not because of heartbreak, but because I knew this battle had reached its most critical point. Adultery might break a marriage, but the documents hidden in that Queen's apartment could completely sever Kevin's escape route. Around 11 p.m., Harrison reported that the apartment was registered under Chloe's cousin's name, but the deposit and 3 years of HOA fees had been paid from an account linked to Sterling Tech. That single detail proved the apartment was not just a love nest. It was a vault for everything Kevin wanted to hide from me, from his employees and from the IRS. I changed into a sharp gray suit, tied my hair back tightly, and told Arthur, "I'm going with them." Arthur frowned slightly. "Miss, that place is dirty. Let the lawyers and our security handle it." I looked at him. For 3 years I signed countless documents because I trusted him. If there are forged signatures of mine in there, I want to see them with my own eyes. Arthur didn't argue further. He quietly opened the car door. The city was damp and cold after the rain. As the car crossed the bridge, I looked at the black water beneath the streetlights, feeling strangely serene. Perhaps a person only truly stops hurting when they stop waiting for an apology. I didn't need Kevin's remorse. I only needed the full unvarnished truth to bury his final excuses. The apartment was in a mid-range building in Queens, completely unremarkable from the outside. When I arrived, Harrison, 2 legal associates, and Chloe were already waiting in the hallway. Chloe was wearing a mask, her eyes red, her hands trembling as she held the keys. Seeing me, she bowed her head deeply. "Amelia, I really didn't know what was in there. I've only been here a few times." I walked past her, my voice icy. "You knew enough to hold the key. Don't claim innocence too soon." She stiffened and stayed silent. The door unlocked, releasing a mix of men's cologne and the smell of old paper. The apartment was small but discreet. The curtains were drawn tightly. A half-empty glass of whiskey sat on the table, and a locked filing cabinet stood in the corner. In the bedroom, the gray sheets were rumpled. I glanced at it and immediately looked away, not out of jealousy, but because the place that housed my husband's betrayal didn't deserve another second of my emotion. Harrison pointed to the wall safe hidden behind a closet door. "Miss Jenkins says the code is Mr. Sterling's birthday." Chloe stepped up and entered the numbers. The safe clicked dryly and swung open. Inside, there wasn't as much cash as I expected, just a few stacks of bills, some watches, 2 jewelry boxes, and a thick stack of manila folders sealed in plastic. Harrison put on gloves and pulled them out one by one. When the first folder was opened, my hand resting on my hip clenched tight. It was a copy of the deed to my private property in Aspen, owned prior to the marriage, attached to a mortgage agreement bearing my signature. The problem was, I had never signed it. Harrison looked at me, his expression darkening. "The signature is forged, but it's an excellent imitation." I picked up the photocopy, staring at the curved tail of my name. 3 years ago, Kevin said he wanted to learn how to forge my signature because he thought my handwriting was beautiful. Back then, I just laughed and signed a piece of scrap paper to show him. It turns out some moments that feel intimate are actually just an enemy measuring the exact angle to stab you. I said, "Photograph everything, seal the originals." The second file was a bank ledger showing funds moving from Sterling Tech to Chloe's accounts and shell companies. The third file contained fake vendor contracts. The fourth file made the entire room fall dead silent. It was a master plan to force my divorce. Kevin had outlined step by step how to transfer assets, fabricate evidence that I neglected the family, and even added notes on using his mother to pressure me if I refused to sign. I read to the last line and unintentionally laughed. The sound was so soft, but it terrified Chloe so much she took a step back. "He was thorough," Harrison noted quietly. I closed the folder. "It's fine. My only regret is using my trust to feed a snake capable of making spreadsheets." Just then, a violent pounding echoed from the front door. Kevin's voice roared from the hallway. "Chloe, open the door. How dare you betray me?" Chloe went pale. Harrison immediately signaled his associate to turn on the audio recorder. Arthur stepped in front of me, but I didn't step back. The moment the door cracked open, Kevin burst in like a madman. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot, his face a portrait of desperation. He saw me, then he saw the open safe. In that split second, all the aggression melted from his face, replaced by sheer terror. "Amelia, listen to me. Those documents aren't what you think. I looked him dead in the eye. Then tell me, is my forged signature on the mortgage for my private property also not what I think it is? His lips trembled. He spun around toward Chloe, raising his hand as if to strike her. You stupid! Arthur moved instantly, grabbing Kevin's arm and twisting it painfully behind his back. Kevin gritted his teeth, but kept screaming. Amelia, don't push me. If I die, you won't live in peace either. I stepped closer to him, pronouncing every word clearly. You are not going to die, you are going to live. Live long enough to answer for every forged signature, every embezzled dollar, and every lie you used to trample on me. Outside in the hallway, the footsteps of building security and police witnesses were approaching. I looked down at Kevin, pinned to the floor. For the first time, his eyes held no contempt, no arrogance, only naked, stripped-down fear. I turned to Harrison. Tomorrow we file the supplementary criminal charges. This is no longer just a divorce. It's a felony case. The next morning, as Harrison officially filed the supplementary charges, Kevin played what he thought was his final sharpest card. Within a few hours, social media was flooded with highly sensationalized articles. Self-made CEO manipulated by billionaire heiress wife. The woman behind the frozen accounts. When money turns marriage into ruthless revenge, I sat in my office scrolling through the filthy words, feeling my heart turn to ice. They called me a vicious woman, a spoiled rich girl who couldn't handle her husband finding a new love, a tyrant, using her family's wealth to destroy a self-made man's career. Arthur stood beside me, suppressing his anger. Miss, the PR team confirmed most of these are bot accounts. Someone paid for targeted ads to drive the narrative and attack you and Vance Global. I set the tablet down. Kevin doesn't have any money left. Who paid for this? Arthur replied. Most likely Martha took the deed to her house upstate and got a hard money loan. Also, there are signs Chloe wired him a small amount before she flipped and cooperated with us. I gave a dry laugh. Even backed into a corner, they still don't know when to stop. On one side, a mother mortgages her house to save her son's fake vanity. On the other, a mistress who begs me for mercy, but still hasn't severed her ties of greed and fear. And Kevin, he was still the same, happy to drag everyone into the mud just to prove he wasn't wrong. By noon, the switchboard at my old company was blowing up. People who didn't know the truth called to scream insults, and someone even sent a funeral wreath to the reception desk. Former coworkers texted me in a panic. Amelia, people online are saying terrible things. They're saying, you destroyed your husband's company out of jealousy. Are you okay? I stared at those messages for a long time. For 3 years, I had lived so quietly that when I was slandered, even the people who worked beside me didn't know what to believe. I didn't blame them. The masses are easily swayed by fake tears and one-sided stories. What I needed to do wasn't to cry louder than Kevin, but to drag the truth into the light in a way that ensured he could never lift his head again. In the afternoon, Harrison sent me the PR summary. A few legitimate news sites had picked up Kevin's story without verifying it. In a heavily edited video interview, Kevin sat before a camera looking hollow and tearful. I admit our marriage had issues, but I don't deserve to be destroyed like this. I only want justice for self-made men who are looked down upon by their wives' wealthy families. I turned the screen off. He really was talented. Even the act of marrying someone else while legally married to me was spun into our marriage had issues. Even forging my signature to mortgage, my property was glossed over with the phrase self-made. I used to love that self-made illusion. I thought if I was just patient enough, he would eventually stand on his own 2 feet. But it turns out some people don't want to stand on their own. They just want to climb onto someone else's shoulders and then complain that the person carrying them is too tall. That night, my father called. His voice was calm, holding no reprimand. Amelia, how far do you plan to take this? I stood by the glass window, looking out at the glittering city until no one dares to use the Vance name as a backdrop for his lies ever again. My father was silent for a few seconds before saying, I let you choose this marriage yourself because I wanted you to understand the world through your own heart. But starting tomorrow, if you need Vance Global behind you, use everything that belongs to you. My eyes stung. For 3 years, I hid myself, not just from Kevin, but from my father. I wanted to prove I could have a love that didn't require massive wealth, power, or the Vance name backing it. In the end, I proved something else entirely. A love that requires you to erase yourself is no longer love. I spoke softly. Dad, I'm sorry, he replied. No need to apologize. You are not the one who should be apologizing. After that call, I sat alone for a long time. I opened my laptop and reviewed the evidence. The wedding video, the bank transfers, the forged contracts, the audio of Kevin plotting to steal my assets, the data from the Queen's safe, and the recording of him threatening Chloe to take the fall. Each file was a needle sewing up my wounds with the cold thread of reason. I called Harrison and the head of PR at Vance Global. Tomorrow morning at 10 a.m., organize a press conference at headquarters. Invite every single outlet that published an article about me. Whoever held the pen to write a lie, I want them sitting in the front row to look at the truth. The PR director asked, Miss Vance, would you like us to prepare a speech for you? I looked at the thick files on my desk, my voice steady. No need. The truth doesn't need much makeup, Harrison asked. And Kevin, I curled my lip. Send him an invitation. If he wants to play the victim for the public, I'll give him a bigger stage. That night, it rained again. The drops hitting the glass sounded like drums before a trial. I knew that tomorrow, when the camera flashes fired, my rotting marriage would no longer remain in the shadows. Kevin had chosen public opinion as his weapon. Now I would show him how deep that blade cuts when it swings the other way. The next morning I wore a tailored white suit. No flashy jewelry, no red lipstick, nothing that would let anyone accuse me of playing the role of a power-hungry elite. I wanted to appear entirely calm, entirely clean, like a blank sheet of paper placed over Kevin's filthy smears. When my car pulled up to Vance Global headquarters, dozens of reporters were already blocking the entrance. Cameras, microphones were raised like a forest of weapons. Some yelled my name. Some fired rapid questions about the divorce, and one man shouted aggressively, Miss Vance, do you admit to using your money to destroy your husband's career? I stopped and looked directly at the man who asked the question. He flinched slightly, probably not expecting me to meet his gaze. I didn't answer immediately. I just said, in 10 minutes inside the auditorium, I will answer with evidence. With that, I walked inside. The grand lobby of Vance Global was brilliantly lit, but the air was as heavy as the calm before a hurricane. Harrison walked beside me, holding the sealed files. Arthur walked behind me, his expression stoic, but his eyes scanning every corner. When the doors to the press room opened, I saw Kevin was already there. He was sitting in the second row, wearing a gray shirt, his hair hastily combed, his face gaunt, but still trying to maintain an air of defiance. Next to him was his mother, Martha, her eyes swollen, her lips pressed tight. Chloe was not sitting with them. She stood in the corner of the room, head down, looking small and lost, like someone who knew the ship she was clinging to was already sinking. I stepped up to the podium. The camera lights instantly blinded me. I looked down at the rows of reporters, looking at the people who yesterday called me a vicious woman, looking at Kevin, trying to suppress the panic in his eyes. I placed both hands on the edge of the podium. Hello everyone, I am Amelia Vance. I am not here today to play the victim, nor to argue about my private life. I am here to clarify 3 things. First, how my marriage was betrayed. Second, how Kevin Sterling's company and assets were actually built. And third, who exactly is using the media to cover up their crimes. The room went dead silent. I pressed the remote and the massive screen behind me lit up. The first video was footage from Chloe and Kevin's wedding. Under the stage lights, Kevin held her hand and clearly said, I do. Immediately following was the clip of me standing up, raising my glass in a toast. Gasps and whispers erupted across the room. Reporters turned to stare at Kevin. The color drained from his face entirely. I spoke into the microphone. At the exact moment this wedding took place, Kevin Sterling and I were still legally married. The screen shifted to a series of text messages between Kevin and Chloe. The words unmasked the man who claimed to be a victim. He called me a gullible woman. He wrote that as soon as he secured his next investment round, he would force me to divorce. He bragged that my assets would eventually be his. Next came the bank statements. Corporate funds used to buy Chloe's wedding ring, book the venue, rent the dress, and secure the hotel suite, all logged under client entertainment, market research, and partner relations. A reporter jumped up. "Mr. Sterling, are these documents real?" Kevin slammed his hand on his chair. "Fake. It's all fake. She has money. She can fabricate whatever she wants." I didn't look at him. I just nodded to Harrison. He stepped forward and played an audio file. Kevin's voice echoed through the speakers, so clear no one could pretend not to hear it. "Just keep the money in your account. Even if Amelia wants an audit during the divorce, she won't be able to trace it. She trusts me too much." The room erupted. Kevin's face went from pale to gray. Martha shot up from her seat, pointing a shaking finger at the stage. "You are destroying my son. You are so wealthy. What does a few lost dollars matter? Why do you have to drive him to a dead end?" This time I looked directly at her. "You call it a few dollars. You call the 3 years of funding I poured in to save his company a few dollars. You call the forged mortgage on my private home a few dollars. You call the money you took from me to buy a house for your younger son a few dollars. Did you even ask me once?" Martha choked. The cameras instantly swiveled to her. The woman who had stood in my lobby, screaming at me to keep my man, was now shaking under the flashes. With nowhere left to hide, I clicked the remote again. On the screen was the deed from the Queen's apartment, the safe, the mortgage with my forged signature, and the forensic audit of Sterling Tech cash flow. Harrison gave a brief clinical presentation. Every claim backed by hard numbers, every piece of evidence verified by external sources. The news outlets that had defended Kevin just hours ago were now furiously scribbling notes. I knew the wind had shifted. Finally, I turned toward Kevin. "You said I used my money to destroy you." "No, Kevin, I merely withdrew what never belonged to you. Your company collapsed because you bled it dry. Our marriage shattered because you betrayed it. You lost your reputation because you traded it for a lie." Kevin stood up, his eyes bloodshot. "Amelia, did you really have to be this ruthless?" I looked at the man who used to be my husband, feeling no turbulence in my heart. "The day you put on a tuxedo and married someone else, you were ruthless enough for the both of us." He took a step back. Perhaps in that very second, he finally understood that I was truly no longer the woman who would soften at a few lowered words from him. The press conference ended in a storm of camera shutters. I took no further questions. As I walked out, I passed by Chloe. Her voice trembled. "Amelia, I'm sorry." I paused but didn't turn around. "Save your apologies for the judge." That afternoon, as I left Vance Global, the sky had cleared. But on the internet, the storm had completely reversed direction. The articles calling me an evil heiress were quietly deleted one by one. Outlets that had used photos of a haggarded Kevin to farm sympathy just that morning were scrambling to post corrections and retractions. The clips from the press conference spread like wildfire. The footage of Kevin in his white suit next to Chloe. The ledgers showing corporate funds funding his bigamy. The forged contract blown up on the screen all became daggers flying right back at him. The public no longer called him a tragic self-made entrepreneur. They called him a fraud, a traitor, a parasite who used love as a cover for his greed. I didn't feel happy. Some victories don't bring relief. They only make you realize you wasted far too much time believing in someone unworthy. I sat in the car watching my phone light up with notifications. Old acquaintances texted to check in, some apologizing for misunderstanding. Others claimed they always knew I wasn't the person the rumors made me out to be. I read them but didn't reply. When the truth was blurry, they stayed silent. Now that the truth was clear, their comfort was entirely unnecessary. Arthur, sitting in the front, spoke quietly. "Miss, there are developments at Sterling Tech. Employees are resigning en masse. The engineering department just filed an internal whistleblower report regarding Kevin forcing them to sign off on fake project milestones." I closed my eyes and leaned back against the seat. "Send all of it to Harrison. Anyone willing to testify gets our help finding a new job within the Vance Global network. They are just employees. There is no need for them to sync with a corrupt boss. Arthur looked at me through the rearview mirror, his eyes softening. You still have a soft spot for innocent bystanders. I opened my eyes, watching the traffic jam through the glass. It's not about being soft. I just refuse to become someone like Kevin. To save himself, he was willing to push everyone else off the cliff. I won't do that. That night, I received word that Chloe had been fired. The stated reason was clear: violating professional ethics and causing severe damage to corporate image. The industry was already passing around the video of her standing beside Kevin at the altar, juxtaposed with the files showing her receiving illicit funds. In just one day, the girl who dreamed of being a CEO's wife had lost her place in her own career. She called me her voice, Amelia. I gave you all the evidence. Why did I still get fired? Why is everyone still cursing my name? I stood on my balcony, watching the city lights blur in the thin fog. Chloe, cooperating with me didn't mean your sins were erased. It only kept Kevin from dragging you down further. But as for the price of destroying someone else's family, you have to pay that yourself. She broke down, sobbing loudly. I really regret it. I stayed silent for a moment. Regretting doing something wrong is different from regretting getting caught. Ask yourself which one you are. I hung up. I didn't hold as much resentment toward her as before. To me, Chloe was just a greedy girl used by Kevin, who ultimately tripped over her own ambition. The person I truly needed to face was Kevin, and I knew he wouldn't go down that easily. Around 10 p.m., Harrison called. His voice was more serious than usual. Miss Vance. Kevin is refusing to sign the divorce settlement. He's claiming he'll countersue for invasion of privacy, defamation, and corporate sabotage. I let out a cold laugh. He really won't learn his lesson until it's too late, Harrison continued. But there's something more urgent. After the press conference, he went to his mother's house. Martha is scrambling for cash, trying to sell her upstate house immediately. Meanwhile, Kevin has left his usual locations. We currently don't know where he is. I frowned slightly. He doesn't have many places left to run. Exactly. But a cornered animal doesn't act rationally. I suggest you increase your security detail. I looked toward the living room. On the wooden shelf sat an old framed photo of Kevin and me on the day we adopted our cat, Snow. That white cat was the only living thing in that old apartment I genuinely missed. After leaving, I hadn't brought her with me yet because I wanted the legal dust to settle first. For some reason, thinking of a cornered, unhinged Kevin made my heart seize. I turned to Arthur. Send someone to the old apartment right now. Bring Snow here. Arthur immediately made the call. 5 minutes later, he turned back, his expression grim. Miss, our people just got there. The apartment door was open. The cat is gone. I froze. Right at that moment, my phone vibrated. An unknown number sent a photo. In the image, Snow was huddled in a carrier cage, her blue eyes wide with terror, backed by the damp concrete floor of an empty warehouse. Immediately following was a text. If you want to save her, come meet me alone. No cops, no lawyers. Amelia, you pushed me to this. Staring at those words, my fingertips turned to ice. Kevin had finally dropped the victim act. He was exposing the most cowardly, despicable part of himself. I showed the phone to Arthur, my voice so calm it felt alien to me. Ping this location. Tell Harrison to get ready. He wants to meet in private. Fine, I will give him one last meeting. I didn't reply to Kevin's text right away. A panicked person usually waits for a reaction to gauge how much control they still have. I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. I put my phone on the table, staring at the picture of Snow in the cage for a long time. Her blue eyes were huge, terrified, but perfectly obedient. Over the past 3 years, in a home that grew colder by the day from Kevin's lies, she was the only living creature that offered me genuine comfort. She used to curl up by my feet every night. I stayed up crunching numbers to save his company. And yet, in the end, Kevin was using the smallest, the most innocent thing I loved as a hostage to force me to my knees. Arthur walked in, his voice low. Miss, we traced the ping. It's coming from an old warehouse out in New York, New Jersey. It's a sparse industrial zone. Harrison is on the line. Miss Vance, you absolutely cannot go alone. We have notified law enforcement of extortion and criminal threats, but we need him to keep communicating to establish intent. I looked at the screen. Kevin had sent another text. Don't try to stall. I know you love that cat. Come here alone. Bring papers withdrawing the lawsuit and wire me $250,000 or you will regret it. $250,000. Even at this exact moment, he still thought everything in the world could be bought. I texted back very simply, address. The reply came seconds later. I showed Arthur. He looked at me, eyes full of worry. Miss, let me go in your place. I shook my head. No, he wants to see me. If someone else shows up, he might snap. But you don't need to put yourself in danger, miss. I stood up and grabbed my coat. I won't be alone, but he doesn't need to know that. Half an hour later, the SUV stopped about 200 Weedy from the warehouse. It was late. A light drizzle was falling, and the dirt road reflected the dim yellow glow of old street lamps. Harrison's support team and Arthur's men fanned out in the dark. I wore a tiny wire under my collar. My phone's location sharing turned on. In my bag was a fake settlement agreement prepared just to buy time. Before I stepped out, Arthur grabbed my arm. Miss, if anything feels wrong, you pull out immediately. I looked at him and gave a small nod. Don't worry, Arthur. I was stupid enough to trust him once. There won't be a second time. I walked into the warehouse. The metal door was slightly ajar, emitting a bone-chilling screech as I pushed it. The inside smelled of mold, sawdust, and old gasoline. A weak flashlight beam cut through the dark from the far corner. Kevin stood there. His shirt was crushed, his beard scruffy, his eyes bloodshot. On a wooden crate next to him was the carrier. Snow let out a tiny meow when she saw me, a sound so small it squeezed my heart. You actually came. Kevin's voice was a mix of toxic glee and bitterness. I looked at him, forcing my voice to stay steady. I'm here, let Snow go. He offered a twisted smile. You're still the same. You care more about a cat than your own husband. I didn't argue. A man like him didn't run on logic. I just asked, what do you want? $250,000. Drop the lawsuit. Issue a public statement saying, this was all a marital misunderstanding. Then let me leave the country. I stared at the face that used to make me soften, now finding it utterly unrecognizable. Do you really think after everything you've done, you still have the right to make demands? Kevin slammed his hand on the crate. Snow flinched, shrinking into the back of the cage. You forced me into this. If you had just given me a way out, I wouldn't have had to do this. You have so much money. What is $250,000 to you? But me? I lost everything. My company, my reputation, my mother's savings. All destroyed by you. I looked right at him. No, Kevin. I just pulled the curtain back. The ugly things hiding behind it were entirely yours. He breathed heavily, his eyes darting around erratically. I pulled the papers from my bag and tossed them onto a nearby crate. Here are the papers you want, but before I sign, I need to see that Snow is safe. Suspicious? He stepped forward and snatched the papers, flipping through them rapidly. While he did, Arthur's voice crackled softly in my earpiece. Miss, we've breached the back door. Give us 1 more minute. Kevin looked up, greed flashing in his eyes. And the money? I want to call the bank to confirm the wire transfer right now. Call them. Put it on speaker. I pulled my phone out, but before I could press a button, a very faint noise echoed from the back of the warehouse. Kevin whipped his head around. You brought people. Before I could answer, he lunged for the cage, yanking it toward himself. Amelia, you set me up. The back doors burst open. The tactical team flooded in. Kevin stumbled backward in panic, but Arthur was already on him, pinning his arms behind his back before he could do anything stupid. Shouts, the thud of boots, and the clatter of the cage hitting the concrete all mixed into total chaos. I dropped to my knees, unlatched the cage, and pulled Snow into my arms. She was trembling violently, her little claws digging into my coat, but she buried her head into my chest, realizing she was finally safe. Kevin, pinned to the floor, was screaming until his voice broke. Amelia, you ruined me. You ruined my life. I stood up holding Snow and looked at him one last time in that freezing warehouse. No, Kevin, this time you signed your own death warrant. Harrison walked in, his voice ringing out clearly. Every threat, extortion, demand, and the act of using an animal for leverage has been recorded. Mr. Sterling, from this moment on, we will only speak through the district attorney. Kevin froze. For the first time, he stopped screaming. On his sweater-drenched face, there was nothing left but the hollow despair of a man who finally realized he had lost everything. I turned and walked out of the warehouse. The rain was still falling, but inside me, a final door had truly closed shut. I took Snow back to the Tribeca penthouse that same night. As soon as we got inside, she kept shivering, clinging to me. Her claws hooked into my jacket as if afraid that letting go meant returning to that dark cage. I sat on the sofa and held her for a long time. Over the past few days I had witnessed Kevin's deceit, betrayal, forgery, and embezzlement, but it wasn't until I saw a helpless, innocent animal used as a tool for extortion that my heart truly hit absolute zero. A man who could weaponize the softest thing his ex-wife loved just to bargain for cash was devoid of any humanity worth pitying. Arthur stood a few paces away and spoke softly. "Miss, the authorities have filed the initial report. Harrison is dealing with them. Kevin is in custody, awaiting questioning." I gently stroked Snow's back. "And what is he saying?" Still dodging. "First, he claimed he just wanted to meet to reconcile. When they played the tape of him demanding $250,000, he said it was just momentary anger." I let out a soft laugh. Momentary anger. People cheat out of momentary weakness. They forge signatures out of momentary panic. They extort money out of momentary anger. If every sin in the world could be wrapped up in the word momentary, how would the victims ever get justice? Near dawn, I received a call from an unknown number. The moment I answered, Martha's hoarse sobbing came through the speaker. "Amelia, I am begging you, Amelia. Even if things went wrong, you and Kevin were husband and wife. Drop the charges. He was just confused. He was manipulated by that other girl. He is my only pride and joy. If he goes to prison, how am I supposed to live?" I listened to her cry in silence. For 3 years as her daughter-in-law, I had waited for her to speak to me with such a gentle voice, not to beg, just to ask how I was doing. But the day I had a high fever, she told me young wives shouldn't act fragile. The night I stayed up organizing loan paperwork for Kevin. She said a wife helping her husband was simply her duty. The day I was betrayed, she went to my office to scream that I couldn't keep my man. Now that her son was in a cell, she finally remembered to call me family. I spoke slowly. "Martha, if I was the one locked in that warehouse today, if I was the one being threatened, would you have called Kevin and begged him to spare me?" The line went dead quiet. "But he is your husband." "No, he is the man who married someone else while legally married to me. He is the man who forged my signature. He is the man who used the cat I love to extort money from me. From the second he did those things, he ceased to be my husband." Martha cried louder. "I'll pay you. I still have my house. I'll sell it and pay you back. Please let him go just this once." I looked out the glass window. Dawn was breaking, casting a cold gray-blue hue over the city like a chilled blanket. What he owes me isn't just money, and there are some debts that no amount of sold houses can ever repay. I hung up. Not long after, Harrison arrived. His face showed the exhaustion of a long night, but his eyes were sharp. "Miss Vance, the situation is solidifying with the documents from the Queen's apartment, the forged signatures, the wire transfers to Chloe, and the extortion attempt last night. We are splitting this into 2 paths. The divorce and asset division will proceed in civil court. The forgery, grand larceny, and extortion will be pursued as felonies by the DA. I nodded. "And Chloe, she has agreed to testify, but she has confessed to receiving stolen funds and acting as a proxy for Kevin. I made it clear that cooperation only mitigates her sentence, it does not erase her guilt." I wasn't surprised. You can't step into the mud and expect to walk out clean. But if Chloe told the truth, she at least had a narrow path to save herself. Harrison's phone vibrated. He answered, his expression shifting rapidly. "I understand. Send the filings to my office immediately." He hung up and looked at me. "Sterling Tech just got hit with collection lawsuits from 3 different vendors. A group of employees is also filing a formal complaint about being coerced into signing fraudulent milestone reports. The company is completely unsalvageable." I set Snow down onto her small padded bed next to me. She curled up, her eyes never leaving me. That company has been dead for a long time. I was just giving it blood transfusions so Kevin thought it was alive. Harrison paused for a moment before asking, "Do you want to step in and acquire the remaining assets?" I shook my head. No. Whatever belongs to Vance Global will be recovered legally. Whatever is criminal will be handled by the courts. I have no desire to pick up a rotting shell just because I once put my faith in it. At noon, I went to Vance Global headquarters to see my father. He sat in his massive office, the entire case file resting on his desk. When I walked in, he didn't ask if I was okay. He simply poured me a cup of tea. Just like when I fell off my bike as a kid, he didn't rush to cuddle me. He waited for me to stand up before handing me water. "You're seeing this through to the end." I held the teacup, the warmth pressing into my palms. Yes, I don't want petty revenge. I just want everything to be called by its true name. A mistake is a mistake. A crime is a crime, and betrayal is betrayal. My father looked at me for a long time, his eyes strict yet full of love. Then, starting tomorrow, come back to Vance Global, not to hide behind me, but to take back the position that has always belonged to you. I looked down, my throat tight. 3 years ago, I left this world to chase an ordinary love. 3 years later, I returned covered in scars, but no longer the naive girl who thought love could conquer reality. I said, "Dad, I want to handle the divorce proceedings myself first." He nodded. "Fine, but clears throat. Remember one thing. This family didn't raise you to swallow indignities for the rest of your life. Since you've stood up, you stand up straight." That afternoon, Harrison sent me the schedule for the first court appearance. The divorce was officially entering litigation. I looked at the summons and suddenly felt an immense peace. Kevin once thought I would cry, beg, or at worst, quietly fade away. He never expected the woman he looked down upon to drag every single one of his lies into the blinding light. Night fell. I sat by the window, snow asleep at my feet. My phone was silent. No more insults, no more threats. Just updates from my lawyers and PR team. The quiet after the storm didn't leave me feeling empty. It felt like the silence right before a trial begins, where all the crying, begging, and pathetic performances must give way to hard evidence. I closed the file folder. Tomorrow I would see Kevin in a place where he could no longer use love as a bargaining chip. The morning of the hearing, I woke up very early. Snow was curled up by my pillow, occasionally opening her eyes to check on me, as if still afraid I might disappear. I stroked her head and walked into my closet. This time, I didn't wear white or black. I wore a deep navy suit, simple, modest, but authoritative enough for a place where emotions hold no weight, only documents, evidence, and truth. When my car pulled up to the courthouse, several reporters were waiting. Arthur moved to step out and shield me, but I shook my head. "No need, Arthur. I'm not hiding anymore." I stepped out of the car and walked straight past the cameras. Someone called out, "Miss Vance, are you hoping Kevin Sterling gets a harsh sentence?" I paused for a second. I only hope the law accurately labels exactly what he has done. With that, I walked inside. The courthouse was colder than I expected, not from the AC, but from the chill of countless lives walking in here with their final hopes, only to walk out with irrevocable verdicts. I saw Kevin at the end of the hall. He had lost a lot of weight. His cheeks were hollow, his eyes sunken. Martha stood next to him, gripping her purse. The moment she saw me, she burst into tears. "Amelia, look at Kevin. Look what's happened to him. What more do you want?" I looked at her, my voice calm. "You still don't understand, do you? I don't want anything from him anymore. Because I don't want anything. I am letting the court decide." Kevin looked up at me. His eyes lacked the aggression from the warehouse and the victim complex from the cameras. There was only the exhaustion and panic of a man who knew he had gone much too far. "Amelia, I was wrong." Those two words fell so lightly. 3 years ago, they might have softened my heart. A month ago, they might have made my chest ache. But at that moment, I found it almost funny. People usually only say I was wrong when the price tag is shoved in their face. When they are busy hurting others, they always think they are the smartest person in the room. I replied, "You aren't wrong because you got caught. You were wrong the day you decided to calculate your success using my trust as collateral." Court commenced at 9 a.m. The divorce was handled first. Harrison methodically presented the evidence of adultery, the breach of private assets, and the misappropriation of joint funds. Kevin's lawyer attempted to argue that the marriage was already fractured, that I was cold, and that business stress caused him to lose control. I sat silently listening to them use pretty words to cover up an ugly truth. Fractured, stress, mistake, momentary lapse. No one used the word betrayal until Harrison played the wedding video. On the monitors, Kevin in his white suit held Chloe's hand and said, "I do," to the applause of the guests. The courtroom fell silent. I looked at his face, now aimed firmly at the floor, and suddenly remembered myself that night, standing amidst the wedding music, holding the red envelope, hurting so much I couldn't breathe. It turns out some memories, even when closed, leave incredibly deep scars. After the divorce segment came the asset division and the criminal referrals. The Queen's apartment file was opened. My forged signature was authenticated. The $150,000 funneled to Chloe was verified. The shell contracts, the fake receipts, the fraudulent mortgage on my Aspen property, all were laid out on the table. Chloe was called as a witness. She stepped forward, pale and shaking. The judge asked, "Do you confirm that these funds were placed in your accounts at the direction of Kevin Sterling?" Chloe looked down, her voice choking. "I confirm. At first I knew it was wrong, but I followed his orders. Later, he told me that if anything happened, I had to take the blame." Kevin shot up from his chair. "She's lying. She manipulated me. She wanted the money." The judge banged the gavel, demanding order. I watched the two of them turn and tear into each other, feeling absolutely no emotion. When a romance is built on greed, the only thing left when it collapses isn't regret. It's a scramble to survive. At the end of the session, the judge granted my petition for divorce, citing severe fault on Kevin's part, and formally transferred the evidence of forgery, grand larceny, and extortion to the district attorney's office for criminal prosecution. My premarital assets were fully protected. Sterling Tech's remaining assets were frozen to fulfill restitution and pending investigations. When Martha heard the ruling, she collapsed into her chair. Kevin looked at me as if he wanted to speak, but his lips just trembled soundlessly. I stood up and signed the final decree. My handwriting was straight and clear. This time, no one would ever forge it again. As I walked out of the courtroom, Kevin called out after me, "Amelia, if I could do it over again, I wouldn't have made those choices." I stopped and looked back at him. "No, Kevin, if you could do it over again, you would just hide it better." He stood frozen. I didn't say another word. I walked out of the courthouse. The sun had not yet touched my shoulders. It wasn't warm, but it was incredibly bright. My marriage was officially over, but the final battle for the crimes committed behind it was only just beginning. After the divorce, I thought I would feel instantly relieved. But the truth is never that simple. A 3-year marriage doesn't vanish with a signature, nor is it scrubbed clean just because a judge bangs a gavel. For the next few days, I still woke up at the same times. I would still unconsciously glance at the empty dining chair across from me, where Kevin used to sit scrolling his phone while I set a hot bowl of soup in front of him. The only difference was that my penthouse was quieter, cleaner. It lacked the smell of his cigarette smoke on his coats, the hushed midnight phone calls on the balcony, and the cold, "Don't ask so many questions" that used to make me feel like a nuisance. Snow recovered slowly. She stopped panicking at the sound of doors opening, but loud noises still made her flinch. I took her to the vet, then brought her home to lie in the sunny window. Watching that small creature slowly learn to trust human hands again, I realized I was just like her. I too had been locked in an invisible cage made of love, duty, and false promises. Now that I was out, I still needed time to learn how to breathe without fear. While I tried to pull my life back to normal, Kevin's criminal case moved at lightning speed. Investigators verified the forged contracts, the funneled money, the fake invoices, the coerced employee signatures, and most damningly, the $250,000 extortion demand in the warehouse. The things he thought were buried deep in that Queen's apartment became the bricks building his prison cell. Harrison informed me that the DA was pursuing multiple felonies, and the minimum sentence wouldn't be light. Chloe was fully cooperating, but she would still face charges for receiving stolen property and money laundering. What about Martha? I asked. She has asked to see you multiple times, Harrison said. She says she just wants to say one last thing. I looked down at my cold tea. No need. Whatever needs to be said, the judge will say for me. On the day of the criminal sentencing, I attended as a victim and key witness. Kevin was led into the courtroom wearing an orange jumpsuit. His hair buzzed short, his face so gaunt, I almost didn't recognize the man who had stood under the wedding lights, promising to love another woman forever. Chloe sat in the back row, her eyes swollen red, not daring to look at anyone. When Martha saw her son, she broke down instantly, muttering his name over and over like a lost child. But Kevin wasn't a child. He was a grown man who had chosen every single step he took, from betrayal to fraud, from slander to extortion. When the prosecutor read the indictment, the courtroom was dead silent. Every dollar, every number, every forged signature was detailed meticulously. There were no more vague words like misunderstanding, stress, or momentary lapse. Everything was called exactly what it was. Forgery in the first degree, grand larceny, embezzlement of corporate funds, extortion. I sat and listened, my hands resting on my knees, much calmer than I anticipated. Perhaps I had cried enough in the dark where no one could see. Today, I wasn't here to hurt. I was here to watch the truth finish its job. When given the chance to speak, Kevin stood up, his shoulders shaking slightly. I admit I was wrong, but I never intended to destroy Amelia. I was just under so much pressure. I wanted to prove myself. I was terrified people would find out my success was entirely propped up by my wife. I was afraid of being looked down upon. He turned to look at me, his eyes bloodshot. Amelia, I truly loved you once. I just lost my way. I stared at him for a long time. If he had said that earlier, it might have kept me awake all night. But now, the words were weightless. You cannot use the phrase, I truly loved you, to wash away months of calculated, premeditated betrayal. When the judge asked if I had a statement, I stood up. I do not deny that there was once love between us. But love cannot be the excuse for forging my signature. Pressure cannot be the excuse for grand larceny. Insecurity cannot be the excuse for committing bigamy while legally married to me. I don't want to see him destroyed out of a desire for revenge. I only want anyone who thinks they can weaponize another person's trust to understand that trust is also protected by the iron weight of the law. Kevin lowered his head. I don't know if he felt genuine remorse, and I didn't care anymore. At the end of the hearing, the judge handed down the sentence. Kevin Sterling was sentenced to federal prison for multiple counts of forgery, embezzlement, and extortion and ordered to pay massive restitution to me and Vance Global. Chloe received a lighter sentence and probation due to her cooperation, but she still carried a felony record. Martha collapsed the second the sentence was read. Her wailing echoed through the courtroom, agonizing, but entirely incapable of turning back time. Kevin turned to look at me one last time before being led away. This time there was no resentment in his eyes, only the pitch-black void of a man who finally understood he lost everything because of himself. I walked out of the courthouse as the afternoon sun hit the steps soft and pale. Arthur opened the car door for me, but I didn't get in right away. I stood there taking a deep breath. There was no explosive triumphant joy like people might imagine. There was only the feeling that an incredibly heavy boulder had finally been lifted off my chest. Arthur asked quietly, "Miss Home or Vance Global?" I looked at the crowds walking past the courthouse gates and said, "Vance Global?" He looked slightly surprised. "Today?" I nodded. "Yes, the old road is a dead end. I want to start over from the exact place I left." The car rolled toward Midtown Manhattan. Through the window, I saw my reflection superimposed over the towering skyscrapers. The woman in the glass still bore scars, but her eyes were brighter. I didn't know where the future would take me, but I knew one thing for certain. From this day forward, I would never shrink myself to fit the fragile ego of any man ever again. The car pulled up to Vance Global headquarters just as the sun set. The massive glass tower reflected a brilliant, cold crimson twilight, looking like a door that had been waiting for me for 3 years. Standing at the bottom of the steps, looking up at the Vance logo lit up against the sky, a strange feeling washed over me. It wasn't pride, and it wasn't pain. It was the feeling of someone who had been lost for a very long time, finally finding her way home. Arthur walked beside me, speaking softly. "Miss, the chairman is waiting for you in the boardroom on the 40th floor." I nodded and stepped into the elevator. The metal doors closed, reflecting my face. The woman inside was no longer Amelia in the cream dress, holding a red envelope, standing paralyzed at her husband's wedding. She wasn't the cold ex-wife meticulously gathering evidence to salvage her dignity either. The woman in the reflection was me, Amelia Vance, my father's daughter, a woman who fell hard but refused to stay on the ground. When I walked into the boardroom, the entire executive board was present. My father sat at the head of the table, an appointment portfolio resting in front of him. He didn't speak much. He just looked at me with eyes that were both strict and deeply affectionate. "Amelia, starting today, you officially return to Vance Global as the Executive Vice President of Strategic Investments." The room erupted in applause. I bowed my head slightly to the board, my heart incredibly calm. 3 years ago, I left this place because I wanted to prove I could live an ordinary life, love an ordinary man, and find happiness in ordinary things. 3 years later, I returned not because I failed at love, but because I finally understood something crucial. Ordinary does not mean you have to degrade yourself. Loving someone does not mean you have to hide your own brilliance just to keep them from feeling inadequate. After the meeting, my father asked me to stay behind. He placed a small wooden box in front of me. Inside was the fountain pen my mother had used to sign her very first contract. "Your mother left this for you," he said. "She thought it was time you used it." I picked up the pen, my fingertips trembling slightly. My mother died when I was young. In my memories, she was incredibly beautiful and gentle, but her eyes were always sharp and clear. My father once told me, "Your mother never taught you to be as tough as a man. She only wanted you to be a woman who knew how to love herself before she loved anyone else." I whispered, "I used to think I disappointed her." My father shook his head. "No. A person who knows how to walk away from a mistake is never a disappointment." That night, I returned to my Tribeca penthouse. Snow ran to the door to greet me, rubbing against my ankles just like always. I picked her up and walked out onto the balcony. The city below was a sea of lights, the distant hum of traffic blending with the night breeze. I thought about Kevin, about Chloe, about Martha, and about the 3-year marriage that had stolen so much from me. But strangely, I didn't feel hatred anymore. Hatred is just another leash. I refused to hold on to any thread that connected me to that past. A few months later, the case officially closed. Kevin began his sentence. Sterling Tech was liquidated. All funds belonging to Vance Global were recovered. Chloe, after serving her probation, vanished from New York. I heard she moved back to her small hometown to start over with an entry-level job. Martha sold her house to pay off a fraction of her son's debts. I didn't ask for any more updates. Their endings didn't bring me joy, but they solidified a universal truth. In this life, you always pay the price for the choices you make. A year later, I represented Vance Global at an economic forum in California. Standing on the stage under the bright lights, looking out at hundreds of eyes focused on me, I spoke about sustainable investing, corporate ethics, and how any success built on a foundation of lies will inevitably collapse. When my speech ended, the entire auditorium applauded. I looked down at the front rows, and for a split second, I remembered the applause at that wedding years ago. But this time, the applause didn't hurt. This applause belonged to me. That night, I walked along the beach in Malibu. The ocean breeze blew through my hair, the waves crashing rhythmically against the shore. I took off my high heels and walked barefoot on the cold sand. Someone once betrayed me. Someone once treated me like a puppet. Someone once mistook my silence for weakness, but they were all wrong. I was only silent so I could clearly hear the sound of my own heart. And when that heart told me it was time to stand up, I stood up tall. Epilogue. Amelia's story is a journey through a marriage filled with betrayal, tears, and an ultimate awakening. From a wife who quietly sacrificed everything for her husband, she fiercely claimed her dignity, her wealth, and her own life. It is a dramatic narrative of infidelity, divorce, and consequence, highlighting a powerful female lead and delivering profound lessons about marriage and self-worth. When a relationship loses its foundation of respect, a woman must be clear-headed enough to protect herself, ensuring her kindness is not exploited and her value is never compromised for anyone. Narrator's notes. First, no matter who you love, always keep your self-respect and an exit strategy. Second, neither men nor women should sacrifice themselves so blindly that they lose their own identity. Third, when you are hurt, stay calm. Use reason and the law to protect yourself, rather than lashing out and doing something you will regret. Fourth, wealth, ambition, and love must all walk hand in hand with decency. If they are built on deceit, they will ultimately collapse. Fifth, after a failed marriage, life is still very long. As long as you know how to stand back up, live honorably, and love yourself, a new, happier chapter can always